But I'll tell you what worries me. How does the window cleaner clean the windows? Well, I can't go to sleep at night wondering about that. Could you just sit down at the back there? I'm just worried in case you have a refall there. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Queen's Gallery over here on the right, by the way. Her mansion has an extensive art collection, and she moves it around a number of galleries. So if you like your artwork, pop in there. So here we are in the Royal Mile, linking the palace to the castle. Now we have a stop coming up. It's not a numbered stop. It's not on the tour maps, but does anybody wish to get off in this part of the Royal Mile? Nobody for 4.5 Elliot. Now this portion of the Royal Mile, it's called the Cannon Gate, after the Augustinian canons that lived in the abbey. The word gate in this context is an old Scots word for walk. So the literal translation becomes Canon's Walk, or the Walk of the Canons. Stop number 5 is not too far away, normally serving Canongate Kirk, Kirk being an old Scots word for church. People Story in Edinburgh Museum, sadly all closed at the moment, but I have to ask, does anybody wish to get off at stop number 5? Nobody for stop 5, Elliot. Now please look to the right hand side as we go past the church, and above the porched entrance you will see the Royal Coat of Arms. This is where Her Majesty and other members of the royal family come to worship when they're staying in the palace. The graveyard is the resting place of some notable characters, including Ebenezer Scroggie, blank faces. Charles Dickens used to like going round graveyards to collect names for characters in his books. He misspelt the name Scroggie and it came out as Ebenezer Scrooge. Ebenezer Scrooge, correct. Now a wee piece of research I'm actually working on at the moment. I'm delving back through some old maps. Somewhere in the Canongate and over on the left, round about now, and we're going back to 1850, there was a butcher shop run by a chap called Johnson. Concerned about the diet of the poor here in Edinburgh, he collected all the beef scraps and made a liquid extract out of it. He emigrates to Canada, popping up there in 1871, and he's still making Johnson's liquid beef. Hello there, welcome.
Thank you.
Where are you from?
Yeah.
Right, I'm sorry, I can't. It's nothing personal. There's a couple of seats there, and I think there's a couple up the back.
Kenya, thank you.
Kenya! That is a long way to come for a bus ride.
Thank you very much.
Nice to have you on board. My name's Colin, and Elliot's our driver. So anyway, Johnson pops up in Canada, 1871. He's still making and selling Johnson's liquid beef, and he bumps into a Canadian businessman who went into partnership with him, and he suggested changing the name of the product to Volvo. So it has its origins here in Edinburgh. Now sadly, we are unable to explore the ancient high street of Old Edinburgh. The roads office is being replaced. But we have a stop round the corner if anybody wishes to get off to explore the high street. Nobody from the high street, Elliot. Now as we go through this junction and turn, have a look to your right hand side. A pub called the World's End. Because this is where you would have found one of the old city gates. And for many people living inside the old town of Edinburgh, it literally was the edge of the world. They were born, they grew up and sadly died, never leaving the confines of the old town of Edinburgh. Now, taking this diversionary route gives me an opportunity to talk about the Flodden Wall. It's ahead of us. The Battle of Flodden took place 1513 down in Northumberland. The Scots were very heavily defeated. What remained of the Scots army limped back into Edinburgh, and worried about an English reprisal, the town council decided to build a protective wall around Edinburgh. It took nearly 70 years to do it. One possible reason for it, it was a local authority project. And for 27 years of my life I worked in local government. Things don't move quickly in local government. Another more credible reason, the shortage of manpower. Much of the labour to build the Flodden Wall came from women and children who just didn't have the males around to help build it. On its completion, however, it did pay for itself because finally the town council was able to collect tariffs and tolls that were due to it for people and goods moving through this old town. The street that we're going to pass over here on the right hand side now leads up to the grass market. We're going to visit that shortly. And this stretch of road known as the Cowgate. The Cowgate. This is where farm animals and other beasts were herded up towards the grass market. And once we get to the grass market, it'll become obvious why they were herded up there. So while we're stopped at the traffic lights, can I just point out that we are really missing our festivals this year. There's several different festivals that go on at various times through July and August. The Book Festival, Jazz Festival, music, book, film, TV, and of course the world's famous Arts Festival and the world famous Fringe Festival. Normally, during festival periods, we expect to receive in Edinburgh something in the order of 4.2 million visitors. So we're on the move again. Here's one of the remaining sections of the Ford Mall over here on the right hand side. Now as visitors to Edinburgh, if you'd come here pre, 1760, you would have taken one look at the old town, turned on your heels and left. The old town of Edinburgh was only about a mile long and a half a mile wide. The wooden tenements rose to 13 and on occasion 14 stories. There were no toilets in the houses back then, so if you don't have a toilet, how do you get rid of human waste? You pour it out the window. You're supposed to do it around about 10 o'clock each night, and as you poured it out the window, you were required to shout a warning. The warning was, Gardez Loo. Just think of it though. As a stranger, you've arrived in Edinburgh, you've popped into a pub. Well, the bad news is that pubs used to close at 10 o'clock back then. You've come out the pub, you're going back to your hotel, you're walking down the high street, and then suddenly above you, you hear someone shouting a strange warning. Instinctively, what are you going to do? You're going to look up. An Edinburgh McFlurry. Now today people complain about exhaust fumes from vehicles. Back then everything was horse-drawn. Think about it, horses have exhaust pipes. The streets of Edinburgh, my friends, were literally open sewers, explaining why there was many outbreaks of cholera, TB, typhoid. And there was at least 2 outbreaks of the plague here in Edinburgh. It's debatable, some historians argue about this, but on the occasions when the plague did break out, it has been suggested that people were herded into one street, and the ends of the street bricked up, food and water placed at the end of the street, and you knew when everybody had died, when the food and the water hadn't been touched. It's quite a sad way of dealing with things, but I mean that was their equivalent of our recent lockdowns, I suppose. Now these traffic lights at the end of the street here, West Richmond Street, I've never managed to ascertain the timings, and often skip a story here when I'm trying to fit everything in for you. So I'll just wait and see. Let's see, they're going back to red already. They only seem to let a couple of vehicles through at a time, which is a wee bit annoying. So before I start talking about Surgeon Hall, I'll talk about a visitor we had to Edinburgh back in 1805, Madame Tussaud from France. She of waxworks fame. She left France to get away from her ne'er-do-well husband, who was basically spending her money. And she'd come from a family of executioners. It was her job to make the death masks after her father and then her brother had executed the criminals. She was a very talented woman, a very astute businesswoman, but she never took the time to learn English. She did all the translations through her oldest son. She very quickly realised that here in Scotland we don't have bank holidays the way you have in England, where the whole country shuts down. Here in Scotland, every city, town and royal borough can set its own holiday dates. So one of her very first exhibitions in 1805 was here in Edinburgh, ran for a fortnight. She then moved to Glasgow for the Glasgow holiday period, Aberdeen, Dundee, and then she moved south. It was many years later that actually she started her, well, the permanent exhibition that there is in London. Of course, the site today is not the original site down in London. So here's the lights changing again. We'll see if we get through this time. Anybody tell any jokes while we're stuck here? Well, I'll start a wee bit early for the surgeon's hall. Another benefit of taking this diversionary route, we get to go past Surgeons' Hall. The Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh, it's the oldest such body in the world, founded 1505 by King James IV of Scotland. Back then, the entry into surgery wasn't through medicine. You had to be a barber before you could become a surgeon. The thought of going into the hairdressers the next time I need a short back and sides and having my appendix removed just doesn't appeal to me somehow. And it comes as a bit of a shock, particularly to people from outside the UK, that in order to become a consultant in your field of surgery, it's peer examination. You're examined by your peers at one of the 4 Royal Colleges here in the United Kingdom and Ireland. After your medical studies at university, your time at medical school, if you want to follow a career in surgery, you would join the Royal College of Surgeons as a student, and then there's progressive exams. The final exam that you undertake in order to become a consultant, some 30 plus years ago, 2-day residential exam, and back then the exam fee was £800. I wouldn't like to think what it is now, thousands. The reason I know this, I paid my wife's examinations fees for her. Kind of generous. And she was one of the small minority that did pass her exit fellowship exam first time round. And a couple of years later, she was appointed a consultant. And that's when she divorced me and didn't give me the £800 back. Now, within Surgeons' Hall, you will find a museum. I've never been interested in the medical specimens. What's always interested me is the tools of the trade used over the years. Now, today, when you undergo surgery, most of the equipment is made of plastic, stainless steel, titanium, all these various new alloys. And after each operation, the equipment's put through an autoclave and sterilised. Back then, a couple hundred years ago, surgeons didn't even wash their hands between patients. If you've ever wondered where the phrase operating theatre comes from, surgeons took great pride in demonstrating their work. Members of the public could actually go into what was like a theatre building with tiered seating and watch the surgeon at work along with the medical students. Back then, there was no anaesthetic. At very best, you might get a couple of glasses of whiskey or rum. You were tied down onto the operating table and a couple of burly men stopped you moving around. And to stop your screams annoying the surgeon as he's trying to operate and also give a commentary to the students, you were gagged. Not a particularly nice idea. So we've turned through the lights and we'll get down to Surgeons' Hall very shortly. It's going to appear on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side of the bus. Now I'm not going to mention the architect at this phase. What I'll do is I'll ask you to take note of the pillars, okay? The classical columns at the front of Surgeons' Hall. Just at the other side of the traffic lights here. And then we'll talk about the architect later on. Now if you turn your attention over to the left-hand side, we have the Festival Theatre. And that was the site of the Old Empire Theatre up until 1911. The world's greatest magician of his day, the great Lafayette, a German, was performing in the Empire Theatre for a winter season. 4 nights into his run, the building went on fire. One of his tricks involved the use of a lion. He was worried about the lion escaping, so he had all the fire doors at the rear of the theatre locked off. Fortunately, everybody front of house, including the patrons, were able to escape. Sadly, those in the stage area and behind perished. The building collapsed. The investigators got into the building a couple of days later and they found Lafayette's body, popped it in a coffin, buried him in Sighthill Cemetery on the western side of Edinburgh. A couple of days later, as they got further into the remains of the building, they found the dead lion and they also found Lafayette's body again. The first body had actually been a body double. And I'm not giving away any great secrets of magic when I tell you magicians do use body doubles. To this day, no one knows the identity of the body double. You just don't know. And Edinburgh Magic Club, a club for conjurers and magicians, actually have an annual dinner every year, and the toast is always to the unknown bodybuilder. Now this building over here on the left-hand side, the original Edinburgh University quadrangle, Edinburgh, the fourth oldest in Scotland. The scaffolding came down last year after 5 years of major works both on the inside and the outside. And during that time they found a laboratory and some of the equipment used by Professor Black to identify and isolate carbon dioxide gas. So that's who I blame for global warming. Now next up, number 7 serves the National Museum of Scotland and Greyfriars Bobby statue. Anybody for stop number 7?
Is that Georgian Master?
No, it's not the. I told you that. Stop number 12.
Sorry, I thought you said it.
The one between 11 and 13. Okay? Now I'm a doggy lover. Any other doggy lovers on the bus? Come on, let's go. Oh, thank you. Edinburgh's most visited statue is not someone tall and elegant. So the wee Skye Terrier. As Elliot turns the bus, I'm going to invite you to look to the right. At the end of the railings, you'll see wee Bobby statue. There he is, underneath the street light. Now, Bobby was 2 years old when his master, Jock Gray, died. Jock was buried in the cemetery over here on the right behind the buildings we see. Bobby was a very faithful and attentive wee doggy, and he sat at the foot of his master's grave. Bobby lived for another 14 years, basically cared for by the people of Edinburgh. The town council, as was the requirement back then, paid for his dog licence and his dog collar. And one of the shops over here on the right hand side was a baker shop. And apparently Bobby got into the habit, when he had the 1 o'clock time gun going off on the castle, he left the graveyard, went into the baker shop, and he was rewarded with a great big meat pie. Nice. Any graduates of Edinburgh University on the bus? No graduates of it. I've never had. Oh, somebody's pointing to somebody. Excellent, that's marvellous. Right, you'll be able to tell me what this building is over here. It's the McEwen Graduation Hall, correct? Yeah. Paid for by the McEwen Brewing family. That's where the students graduate from. Funnily enough, go to St Andrews, you'll never guess who paid for their graduation hall. The Younger Brewing family. The only thing I can conclude from that is there's a direct link between students graduating and drinking copious amounts of beer. Am I correct?
Might be.
Might be. That's not a very definitive answer, is it? Next door to it, in this building over here on the left, that's the original Edinburgh University Medical School. Still used in part to this day to teach students medical science. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, studied medicine there. And he actually based Holmes's observational and analytical skills after one of his lecturers, whose name has just escaped me at the moment. Now, very conveniently for the medical students, over here on the right there's a pub called the Doctors. It's also very convenient for members of the general public, because you can spend all night in there. Go 1 over the 8, stumble home, and your nearest dealers will ask you, "Where have you been tonight?" And you can truthfully say you're at the Doctors. Now sadly, no outdoor festivals at the moment. The festivals are very much subdued affairs, because this is a lively part of Edinburgh during the festival period. And there's a wee blue pub coming up here on the left-hand side, Sandy Bells, synonymous with live music. For those of us that can remember Barbara Dixon, the famous Scottish singer from Dunfermline, she actually started her career in Sandy Bells. Now if you missed wee Bobby the first time round, don't panic. We're going to pass Bobby again over here on the right-hand side, as Elliot takes us down into Candlemaker Row. The candle makers of Old Edinburgh were forced to ply their trade here for a couple of reasons. 1, the fire risk. 2, candles for the cheaper end of the market were made from animal fat. So can you imagine the smell here? It was pretty awful. We got the animal fat around the corner in the grass market. Does anybody wish to get off in the grass market? Stop number 8. Nobody for the grass market, Elliot. The grass market's so called because animals that ate grass and a few more, this is where they were traded, slaughtered and butchered in the street. We call it a shambles in Scotland. It was also a very popular location for entertainment purposes. Thousands would flock into the grass market to come and watch executions. If you look to your right hand side, just after the traffic lights, you'll see a circular stone plinth.